warm-up before TEDx tomorrow. Get a little bit of a smaller audience. So I'm Kate Clopeck. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Community Water Solutions. So before I kind of tell my story and what brought me to found Community Water Solutions, I just wanted to give a quick little overview of what exactly we do to kind of put that into perspective. So I'm sure many of you know that we're in the middle of a global water crisis. Almost 1 billion people around the world lack access to safe drinking water, and it leads to the deaths of millions of children every year. And the thing that really drew me to this problem was that we already have the answer to this enormous challenge. The technologies already exist, and technologies that work really well in rural areas that are made from local products that are really cheap are out there. And yet people are still dying every single day from waterborne disease. And I was an engineer, and when I kind of learned more about the water crisis, I was just so amazed that what I always viewed was the hard part, that actually coming up with some sort of technology that you could use to treat water in an affordable way, that had already been done, and it had been done 15 times over. But people just didn't know these technologies were out there and didn't know how to use them. So really quickly, what Community Water Solutions does is we empower local women to start clean water businesses. So we'll go into very rural communities that don't have access to safe drinking water, but do have access to some sort of water source. And we train local women how to take the contaminated water from that source, treat it in a centralized location, and then sell that water at an affordable price to their community. So my story and CWS's founding story, I think is kind of interesting. I started off as an aerospace engineer. I was at the University of Virginia, and I loved math and science, and I loved the movie Apollo 13, and so I decided I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. And I really did love studying it. I loved all of my classes. I felt challenged. I felt fulfilled in my classes. And then one day I went on an alternative spring break to Nicaragua. It was one of those trips where you volunteer at an orphanage and play with children. And it was my first time ever going to a developing country. It was my first time ever leaving North America. And I just, had the, I think, kind of stereotypical experience. I just fell in love with the people there and just wanted to be able to do more. I wasn't really happy with just like coming and playing with kids for a week, even though I saw a lot of the benefits that people did get out of experiences like that, both the children and the students. But I felt like I had technical skills that could be used, and I wanted to kind of learn more about what I could do as an engineer. So I joined the Engineers Without Borders chapter at my school, and kept going back to Nicaragua every spring break, every winter break, and I eventually learned about the global water crisis through other engineers involved in Engineers Without Borders, and joined the team and got to go to Cameroon, and ended up writing my senior thesis for my aerospace engineering degree on water treatment in a rural village in Cameroon in West Africa. I don't know how I made that happen, but somehow they still let me graduate. And I had big plans to move to Nicaragua and teach physics at a school. And then the last minute the plans fell through, and so I kind of panicked and just looked for any job I could find and got a job with a company called Aerojet that is a defense contractor. And they basically build propulsion systems for missiles. So I fell completely back into my kind of aerospace roots and spent a year essentially building bombs for the government. And as you can imagine, I was not very happy in that career. I realized that the parts that I really loved about engineering were problem solving and staying up all night working on a problem set for calculus. When you don't actually do that in an everyday job, there's software programs, you're typing in parameters and it's spitting out all the stuff that I really had enjoyed figuring out. So I used to sit at work and kind of Google different careers and saw on Facebook, funny enough, that someone that I'd gone to UVA with was in this program at MIT, and she was in Ghana doing a water project. So I immediately emailed her and found out who her advisor was at MIT and started stalking her. And eventually got into a program there where I focused my research on water treatment in Ghana. And that's where I met my CWS co-founder, Vanessa. And the two of us were both writing our theses together in Tamale, in the northern region of Ghana, and would stay up at night in the lab kind of thinking about kind of what we were seeing, and if we could do things differently, what would we do? And the challenges that we really noticed were kind of what I talked about before. There were all of these water treatment technologies available in rural Ghana. You could go in the market, you could buy a water filter for like $5, you could buy chlorine, you could buy all of these different things. And yet all the other projects that we saw going on, all the other NGOs that were there, were busy like coming up with the next water filter or the next product. And we really saw that there was a gap in between the engineers coming up with the products and the people who needed them, and the whole implementation process that fell in between. And this was in 2008, and that's when kind of this idea of social enterprise and for-profit businesses was really, everyone was talking about it. I felt like all the development classes at MIT that I took, everyone was talking about how for-profit business models were really sustainable, and we hadn't really seen anything like that being done in water. There were a lot of nonprofits that were maybe selling products, so they were technically businesses like selling water filters to people, but we hadn't seen a lot of people just selling clean water in rural villages. So that's how we came up with the idea for community water solutions. So before I explain a little bit more about the next step in our founding story, I want to just talk about the water situation in Ghana a little bit, because it's really unique and it's one of the reasons why we were there doing our research in the first place. And basically the big thing is you can't drill boreholes or wells in this region. So a lot of people maybe heard of groups like Charity Water or World Vision that go around and drill wells in a lot of places that lack access to safe drinking water. And you just can't access the groundwater here because of the rock. So all of those big NGOs have kind of left this region. But a lot of people do have access to, like I mentioned before, these surface water sources that we call dugouts. And those are in these two pictures here. And the water in these dugouts are extremely turbid, which means they're very muddy. My advisor in grad school had traveled all over the world studying the water crisis for 20 years, and the reason why she was in Ghana and the reason why she brought us there was she said this was some of the most turbid, most contaminated water she had ever seen. But it's interesting because people had access to it. They didn't, there wasn't the water shortages that you see a lot of other places. A lot of villages were kind of situated around one of these sources. So while women were still walking to fetch water, they weren't walking like 10 miles to have to go fetch water. They had a source there. And so when Vanessa and I saw that, we just thought, this is crazy. The technologies are here. The water's here. Why don't we just teach people how to treat that water, and then let's try and sell it. So if for some reason, the technology breaks or the women just get tired of all of the work, hopefully the money that they'll earn working in the business will motivate them to keep coming back. So we went back to MIT and we got some funding to try out our idea in one system. And that's something that I always make sure I talk about when I'm speaking with students, because when you're in school, there are so many opportunities to kind of take ideas and implement them with the support of your school. There are like so many different ways that we could have found funding in MIT if we didn't go the avenue we went to. And a lot of schools like Middlebury have those opportunities too. So take advantage of that while you're here, because there's never a better time to be an entrepreneur, to try out ideas, than when you're a student and you have access to all of these sources. So we piloted our idea in one village, and we found out it took about 3 weeks. The first thing we did was kind of go and meet with the village chief and elders and explain to them what our idea was and see if they'd want to work with us. And when they said yes, we then kind of figured out how to build what we call a water treatment center, but it's really just a fancy word for a big concrete slab. I'm sure some of the people that have come and worked with us can attest to. And it takes about 2 days, and the building process it's very easy, but it's something where the whole community comes and helps to do, and it's kind of the first bonding thing that we have with the villages. Then we decided to manufacture and distribute safe storage containers, because one of the big things we had seen is that water recontamination is a big issue. So we decided, okay, let's give everybody one of these buckets for free. That way they'll have a place in their house to keep their safe drinking water. We'll hopefully cut down on contamination, and it will also give us a way that we can price the water. So we'll make every bucket cost the same amount, everyone will have the same one, and that will be, we thought, the easiest way to set up a business around this idea. We decided also to distribute those buckets on a house by house basis, because that way we could talk to each individual family and kind of gauge what their knowledge was about the water crisis, and then tailor our kind of education field based on how much they knew. We knew that we were only going to be in Ghana for about a month, and that hopefully our business would be able to be run by the women that we trained, and so we really wanted to take advantage of the time we did have to talk to everybody and make sure that people understood what was going on. So then we decided we wanted to work with women because they're typically the ones that deal with water in the household, and we thought that working with two would probably be a good idea. And we had these ideas that we would go into the village and we'd have this big meeting and we'd see which women were the most excited about water and which ones were really entrepreneurial, and we'd have them run our water business. And we quickly learned that that was just not at all how decisions were made in the communities. The village chief and elders make all of the decisions. No woman was even really comfortable volunteering. They wanted the elders to make that decision. So we were very hesitant. As two women, we thought this was going to be like our big women's empowerment moment in the village, and now here was this big group of men deciding who was going to work there. But we went with it, and we continue to use that method, and it's always worked really well. It was one of those kind of cultural differences where we just had to realize we can't win every battle. We want to set up a successful water treatment system that's going to last in the long run, and we kind of have to go with it on this one. So the chief and elders select the women, and then we train them how to treat the water, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then we open for business. So that whole process is about 2 weeks. It's really, really simple. And then once the water treatment center is open, it's completely run by the women that we train. So everyone from the community will come out with their blue bucket and pay usually about 10 cents to fill it with clean drinking water. And then we teach the women kind of how much of that money they need to save to buy more treatment materials and how much they can take home as their profit for working at the business. Then the final step is monitoring, and this is something that both my co-founder and I were really kind of passionate about. If you can be passionate about monitoring before we started CWS. For my personal thesis, I had been going around and doing the monitoring and evaluation for another water nonprofit because they had never had the staff to do it. And what I found was about 60% of these water filters had fallen into disuse, but the reason why most people weren't using them was because some small little thing had broken or someone had not understood one of the things in the training. All these things that could have been avoided if someone had just come back like once to check up on them. So we were pretty stuck on this idea that we were not going to go into a new village unless we had enough funding for the next 5 years of monitoring. And it definitely slowed us down when we wanted to grow at the beginning, but it's something I'm really proud of and glad that we stuck with, because now we have been able to see the impact that it has. And a lot of our communities will go through ups and downs when we open a water business, and it's nice being able to have the funds and have the staff to go back and help the women entrepreneurs get through those dips in sales at some point during the year. So when we monitor, what we do is we'll go back and we'll test the quality of the water, both at the water treatment center and in random individual households. So we make sure it's being treated correctly. And then we also just talk to people. We ask them about the taste of the water, about the price. We talk to the women running the center, and sometimes we'll hear from them like, oh, not a lot of people are coming this week, and I make more money in my farm, so I'd rather do that. And so we can kind of pinpoint when times in the year when stuff like that happens and stop problems before they become bigger. So the first step in the water treatment process is particle removal. And I will say, the two steps that I'm about to go through are what we've chosen to do in this region of Ghana with the technologies that were available and effective and cheap there. As we grow, we're not really tied to using these two products. We kind of feel like you could put in any sort of technology into our model and it could still work well. But in Ghana, we use first a product called alum. And basically, it's a coagulant. It's that little white ball over there. And you take it and you swirl it around in the water for about 2 minutes, and all of the big particles flock together and eventually settle at the bottom of the tank. So the water will go from looking like this to the next morning looking clear. And we usually let it settle for 24 hours. So once the water is clear, it's still contaminated. So the next step is disinfection, and we use a product called a chlorine product called Aquatabs. And these are really cool because they're already dosed, and they're dosed for 200 liters of water each one of those tablets. So it's really easy to train the women the correct amount of chlorine to use and the correct amount of money to save every time they use a chlorine tablet, because everything matches up with the different containers we use in the treatment center. So the women will scoop the water from those blue drums there into a big tank, and then for every big blue drum they scoop, they put in a chlorine tablet, and then that's it. It's super simple. There's no moving parts, there's no pumps. It is pretty labor intensive, but the women are paid for the work that they do, and we think in the long term it's better to be a little bit more work than to have a pump that's going to break down in a year and then have the whole system stop working. So once the chlorine tablet's added, it takes about 30 minutes for it to be active, but it takes longer than that for someone to walk home with their water. So basically, as soon as it's dissolved, the women can start selling the clean water. So that first trip that Vanessa and I made to implement our pilot system was in 2008, in June of 2008. Since then, we've now implemented 49 water businesses throughout Ghana that provide clean water to almost 30,000 people. And kind of the statistic that I'm the most proud of is that every business that we've launched is still in operation today, every single one. It doesn't mean that every person in every village is drinking clean water every day. Behavior change does take a long time, and in some of our communities, there's still those households that aren't coming to fetch water. But what it does mean is that the women are making enough money that they're motivated to keep the businesses open. And so at any point when someone does decide that they want to drink safe water, they now have the option, where previously, even if they wanted to pay 10 times as much as they pay in our business, they couldn't. There was no option. So the way that we've really been able to grow to reach 49 villages has been through our fellowship program. And this was something we launched in 2010. So after our first pilot village, it went pretty well, and Vanessa and I went back to MIT, and we got some more money, because they just love giving money to students. And we went back and did a second village, and that worked really well. And at that point, we, as an organization, had to make a decision about if we wanted to actually be something, or if we wanted to be a student project. And so I was graduating, and I said, okay, I'm not going to look for another job, I'll move to Ghana. And I didn't really get paid, they gave me a food stipend. But if we don't have enough money to start paying me in a year, I'm going to have to go do something else. But we had applied for all of these grants and just thought, like, of course we're going to get them. We got money every time we applied for something at MIT. Like, we're the superstars. And we didn't get anything that we applied for. I mean, we were applying for like millions of dollars from Gates and Coca-Cola. Like, I'm sure no one even read the application. So that was a big eye-opening experience for us. And I had graduated and didn't have a job and went to Nantucket to wait tables before moving to Ghana. And so we literally started fundraising like $50 at a time. We were writing letters to our friends and family. We had a 5K road race. And I think we raised about $3,000. And I was like, okay, great. That's enough for us to do one more village. So we bought my plane ticket and we had $1,500. And I went to Ghana and we did our third village. And then I came home and we fundraised and I go back and we do another village. And so for about a year, that's kind of how CWS was growing. We were doing one community every few months. But at the same time, we were getting all of these emails all the time from students saying, you know, we stumbled across your website, or we saw something about you on MIT's website. We'd love to come to Ghana, we'd love to volunteer. And we were just like, I mean, we don't even know what we're doing. How could we possibly have students come and volunteer with us? And then one day we just thought, you know, we've done the same thing in every village we've gone to. It's taken about 3 weeks. It's not rocket science, it's pretty easy. Like, there's no reason why students couldn't come and do this themselves. And we thought, I mean, people fundraise to run the Boston Marathon for charity. Maybe people would fundraise to be able to come and implement one of our systems. So we launched the CWS Fellowship Program in June of 2010. and we had 7 applicants, and we brought one team of 5, and every student had to raise money to then come to Ghana, and then we would teach them how to implement one of our systems, but then they would go in the village and do it themselves. And it was pretty successful, and it was a lot of fun to work with the students, and we kind of saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, this could be a great way for us to be able to reach the scale that we want. We knew our idea worked. Our villages were still up and running, the very first ones that we had done 2 years ago. We just needed the help to grow. And it wasn't just the funding, we needed the people. We needed people to go into the community. There's something about the momentum that you have when there's a team of students working with a translator and working with the community that was so different than when it was even just me going into a village by myself. And we were finding that the fellowship villages, in general, more people were buying water after opening day. The behavior change was going a lot more quickly for families that wanted to understand. We wanted to understand the importance of safe drinking water. So by the next fellowship, it doubled in size, and then we did another one the next winter, and it got even bigger, and now we've had 155 students participate in the program. We usually take about 30 to 40 at a time, and they're from all over the world. Some of them are here today. And I think what the program offers the students is an opportunity to really see what it's like to work in the field and to work for a development organization from fundraising, which most of us think is not very fun because it's not, to then seeing where that money is going when you get to Ghana, buying your materials, going to the community, working with the people. And then when you leave, part of what our fellows fundraise for is that 5-year monitoring cost. And we will post all of our monitoring reports on our website. So when you come to Ghana as a fellow, you can go back 3 years later, check on our website and see how your village is doing, see pictures of the women that you were working with while you're there. One thing I also think is pretty cool is it is a short-term trip. It's only 3 weeks. So we get a lot of people emailing us saying like, oh, there's no way you could possibly have an impact in 3 weeks. Like, we don't really get it. What is this program? But you can. And we've never had a team come and not finish their project. And then you can go do other things. You don't have to sacrifice your summer break to go volunteer. You can do this at the beginning. Go get your paid internship. We know that students are experimenting and trying to figure out what they want to do. You don't have to commit 2 years to the Peace Corps. You can come and get a little taste of what it would be like. So like I mentioned before, fundraising is a big part of the fellowship program. It's been kind of what's fueled CWS's growth is the fact that we now have all of these advocates for us out raising money the same way we originally did, $50 at a time, $100 at a time. But it's a really valuable skill to have if you want to work in this field. And so we like that our fellows go through this process before they come and work with us in Ghana. Because I wish I knew how hard it was going to be before I had fallen in love with this type of work. Once they're on the ground, like I mentioned before, our fellows basically implement one of our systems from start to finish. We have a 4-day orientation where they spend half of the time in the office, hearing presentations from us, learning exactly what we do, but then the other half of the time going to our communities, seeing how they work, and seeing what they're going to be doing. But then once the implementation process starts, we pair each fellow and all the fellows in teams of 4 and pair them with a new community. And then no one from our leadership staff goes with them to the field. We kind of think that would be silly. If we could do it, we would just be doing it ourselves. Like, we do need these fellows. So if stuff goes wrong, if they need to change things kind of about our models that it fits their village, fellows have to make those decisions on their own. A lot of times they won't even have cell phone service. They can't even call us while they're there. And then they'll come back every night and we have like a nightly debrief with all of the teams. So we can discuss, okay, what happened today? What's your plan for tomorrow? You can hear from other fellows about what's happening in their community. And then the last couple days, they monitor their village and then we take over. So this has just been a really exciting thing for us. I love working with the students, with these big groups. I get to meet so many amazing people, and they all get really excited about what CWS is doing and then continue to be advocates for us when they come home. And I think our fellows have a pretty good time while they're there as well. They get to meet people with similar interests from all different schools. We try not to pair people from the same school and the same team. And a lot of them end up staying in touch with each other and with their translators and sometimes with their communities as well. So we happen to be recruiting for our fellowship program. So this is the information if anyone is interested. But that wasn't really the point of this talk. It was just more to talk about how CWS has evolved now into an organization that originally started as a group of students just wanting to bring clean water to one village, to now not only do we get to bring clean water to thousands of people, but we get to work with students who are just like us and provide them with the opportunities that we had when we were first starting out, and hopefully inspire them to then either stay involved in the water crisis, stay involved in international development, or go do kind of whatever they want, but to see kind of what it's like to start a project, fund it, and complete it all. So, if anyone has any questions, I'll happily take them.
Can you talk more about the reception that you got when you would go to a village in terms of the villagers' desire for clean water or their awareness of how illness in their community might be linked to their water supply?
So we've always received really warm receptions from our communities, but I do think there's something that's really unique about Ghana, which I didn't mention before, which is they're just coming off of a guinea worm kind of endemic. They're now guinea worm free. So for anyone that doesn't know, that guinea worm is this like really horrible waterborne disease where you essentially ingest a parasite that's in water, and then a little worm grows within you for a year, and then it exits through one of your extremities. And so it's a very visual disease, unlike diarrheal disease, which is like the most common waterborne illness that most people end up dying from. And there had been a huge campaign over 15 years by the Jimmy Carter Center to eradicate guinea worm. And so everybody in every community has heard about guinea worm, that it comes from water. They know someone that had guinea worm, and there's been all of these education presentations about water for years. So there's definitely kind of a first hurdle that we don't have to overcome when we go into a new community. As we go to new countries, that will probably change. My experience in Cameroon was the base knowledge about waterborne disease and illness was a lot lower, was nowhere near what it was like. The flip side of that is everyone knows about guinea worm, but they don't know that much about the other waterborne diseases. And now that guinea worm's been eradicated, we have some people in some communities that are like, oh, well, if there's no guinea worm in my dugout, then maybe I can just drink that water again, and that water is free. And we realized even our Ghanaian staff knew a lot less about the other waterborne diseases than we thought they did. And they actually requested that we start having Friday staff meetings with our Ghanaian staff about about typhoid and about diarrhea and about cholera. And that's been really fun to see them get really engaged and ask questions and learn more, and now listening to the different things that they talk about when they're monitoring that they never used to talk about. They used to just say, oh, there's dirt in your water and the dirt makes you sick. And now I hear some of my staff members that have worked with me for 4 years, Ghanaian men, talk about germs and cholera and how if you don't wash your hands after going to the bathroom, and explaining the whole germ theory, and it's really exciting to see that change.
How do you find the communities you go to and decide which ones you most need?
So when we first started, we had a specific village in mind where my co-founder had worked for her thesis, and for the first year it kind of grew organically from there. So we worked in this village called Casa Legu, and then the village next door had heard of us, so we went there, and then someone's brother was a chief in another village, so we went there. But in the past 2 years, we've grown a lot, and so we've gained some recognition from the Ghanaian government, and we now have kind of unofficial partnerships with all of their district assembly offices, which are they're kind of like congressmen, the district assemblymen. So now they give us a list of communities in their district that don't have access to pipe water, and that they think are drinking from dugouts, and then we'll go and check them out and see if the water source is what they say it is, and if it would work with us, and that's how we get most of our communities now. It is kind of sad that a lot of times we get these lists from the district assemblymen who are supposed to be taking care of their district. It's totally off. They don't know the size of the village, they don't know the name, they don't know what's going on there, but it's a starting point, and it's been nice to kind of foster that relationship with them.
I really love your model, and I really love the way you're using students as part of your fundraising model, this whole sustainability piece. Back to the monitoring, though, I was wondering, now just hearing what you just explained, if you're actually looking at sort of the health outcomes, or if you're able to say, I don't know if there's anybody even medically trained that even visits these villages to be able to show how the clean water actually over time has reduced these actual diseases and things that they're encountering. So is that a piece of the monitoring, and is that a way that the Ghanaian government interested in that piece of it?
So I'm glad you asked that question because people ask me that a lot and something I'm very inspired about. So we do not study health impacts, and the reason we don't is because we don't have any baseline information, and to be able to really collect that information would take would take a lot of money and a lot of time before we get there. And unfortunately, the Ghanaian government we don't have a financial relationship with them. They don't sponsor anything, and they don't gather that data. And when we first got started, I think a lot of the reasons why we didn't get grants is because we weren't showing health impacts from our water treatment centers. But my co-founder and I were kind of really big sticklers for the fact that we didn't want to write a thesis. We wanted to bring clean water to people. And there's already millions of studies out there that show if you drink water that's fecally contaminated, you are going to get sick. There's other things that can make you sick as well if you don't wash your hands after you go to the bathroom and don't have proper sanitation, if your crops are contaminated. But water is definitely one of the main factors. And so we wanted to spend all of our funding bringing clean water to people. So when we monitor, we're only monitoring kind of whether or not people have access to water or not, and if the water is being treated correctly. So we'll do tests about whether the water is contaminated, and then if it's not and people are drinking it, then we know it's not making them sick. So we don't have any health impact information. But we are always welcome to partner with people, always open to partnering with people. I always say that if anybody wants to come and do a study in a community and then we'll go implement there and then you can do a study after, that's awesome. But it's not what we've chosen to focus our kind of funding and time on. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, are you measuring the uptake? So if you've got a village of 1,000 people and only 100 buckets of water are being sold a day, you might, without monitoring the health impact, you're still going to know that there's actually a fairly low percentage of families that are taking advantage of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking at it that way to measure
Yeah,
it?
so that's what we do during our monitoring visits when we do those household visits. We'll go and we'll record if there was water in the family safe storage container and how full it is. And so we have compiled, in new villages we go like once a week, and then we'll start dropping off once every 2 weeks, once a month, and that's what we post on our website. So when you go there, you can see in Chani, one of our villages, every time we visited we visit 6 households per visit. So every time we went to Chani, every time we visited a household, there was water in their bucket. There's somewhat small sample size. Sometimes we do bigger sample sizes if it's a newer community. And then we average everything, and then that's how we rank our villages about whether, on average, when we visited households in your community, 7 out of 8 had water in their safe storage container, but in this community, you're below average because only 3 out of 8 did. And then when we assess what villages we're going to check up on more the next month, we use those statistics on which ones to go to more, and then low-performing villages maybe do a presentation in their school, or we'll just visit more households and ask them what's going on. Is it that you can't afford it, that you don't like it, do you not like the women that are working there, and try and figure out, that's how we base kind of all of our troubleshooting is on the usage factor in every village. And there's always random reasons why some are doing poorly and some are doing well, and it's always very interesting to look into what's going on in a low-performing village at any given time.
Has this project changed any gender dynamics in the community there?
It really hasn't that much, because women have always been the ones that deal with water. So we're the ones fetching the water. So if anything now, we set up our water treatment centers right next to, in most cases, right next to the water source. So like most ladies are going in the morning 2 or 3 times to that water source to go collect water for their family, and 2 or 3 times in the evening. And now when the water business is open, maybe one of those times they'll go fetch clean water. And so they're still the women all coming together, all kind of gathering at a point. The conversations are always really fun to listen to. And the women aren't bringing home millions of bucks here. Like they're bringing home, most of these families are living on less than $1 a day. The women are making maybe like $1 a week, $2 a week. So it's not like all of a sudden these ladies have this huge source of income and all the men are going to be threatened by it. It's supplemental, but they can do interesting things with it, like maybe buy their kids a school uniform, or not have to go out to the farm as long that day because now they have this other income coming in.
This is a question that maybe some of your fellows could answer as well, but when you interact with these students who come back from their 3-week experience, do you see a shift in how they're thinking about water solutions, accessible technologies, or even thinking about water issues and technology with the students? Some of that.
Honestly, yeah, maybe.
Sure. Well, I'll actually talk about it from, so I went as a fellow J-term 2 years ago, and then went back as a fellowship leader, and that was something that like was the most meaningful to me as a fellowship leader. Is like I did debriefs with my fellows every night, and seeing their responses to the people that they worked with was one of the most incredible experiences. In that there's especially, I'll talk about like one situation with, there was a girl who had what we think was a broken arm. But you couldn't really tell, and at some point I think the bone had like protruded, so it was clearly extremely infected, and there was really nothing that anyone could do for her. There was really, it was, because we talked about, because my fellow was like very, very touched by the situation and really, really wanted to figure out how he could help this little girl. And the realization of like, we can go and we can talk to her with a translator. We can figure out exactly what happened and how it's hurting and what's going on. And we can, do our little like EMT knowledge that we have and like try and help. But the realization that the health infrastructure just wasn't there. That, like we could get her to the town if we needed to, and we could try and get her into a hospital. But, the doctors weren't there. The money to pay for the hospital wasn't there. And the medication really wasn't there. And it was like just this amazing experience to watch my students just be like, this is a major problem. Like, and it goes back to the water of like the infrastructure, like before community water solutions were in most of these communities. And even my first conversation with my chief when I was implementing, he was like, we have no other option. He said, he turned to us and goes, we know this water is horrible. Like I can look at it in my bowl and it's brown and there are things in it and like, I know that that's bad for my health, but I literally don't have any other option of anything to drink. There's nothing else. And we talk about there are these little, you can buy it's like bottled water, but it's in these little sachets, and it costs, what is it now, like 20 times the amount of one of our buckets of water, and it's like a 20th of the size of the bucket. So it's the fact of the matter that like it costs, 20 cents to get one of these packets, and if you're living on less than $1 a day, there's no way you can afford that. And so, yeah, I think a lot of fellows leave and go on to, like even on my Facebook feed, a lot of them are going after Peace Corps now, or, going back in other places and implementing things, writing theses on, development projects and implementation in villages. I wrote my thesis on like monarchy and leadership in rural villages, which was definitely inspired by my relationships with my chiefs that I've seen. So, yeah. Sorry, I can talk a lot about this if you want. You can't tell, I love it. So.
Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I came into community water solutions pretty skeptical, actually. I'll be the first.
A lot of people do.
Yeah, which is why it was such an incredible experience for me because, I've been starting to learn about a lot of the pitfalls that can come from all these development projects. And you go there and then you see these abandoned wells and you're like, just all these great intentions that can crumble so easily. And so the attention that was paid to kind of working within community norms and really adjusting to people's lifestyles and fitting that in as smoothly and seamlessly as possible, while also having the emphasis on, like Kate said, using what is there, like that technology exists. We don't have to be the person who comes up with a brand new thing. You can just take, the things that exist and do it cheaply. And that was also kind of a really hopeful for me takeaway, that having an impact like this is possible. Starting out from such a small scale and then really growing. If when you actually pay attention, and I totally lost my train of thought. But yeah, it just makes you think about things like water and development projects in a more straightforward and feasible way, and asking the right questions, I think.
I think hopefully people leave not as cynical about development and start off, because it doesn't always have to be like what people are studying in school, and like there's so many models out there that aren't working, but there's a lot of small organizations like CWS that do have models that are working. We're just little and not that many people know about it. So I like it when we have skeptical fellows, and a lot of times we do, and they're feisty in their applications, but we like them anyway. And then they come, and it's nice to see that realization, or to have them challenge us. I mean, we have debriefs every night, and the debriefs are kind of boring if everyone's like, oh, my day was so great, and I loved my chief, and it was so wonderful. Like, when we have really interesting discussions about these deeper issues, it makes for a much better experience. And it makes CWS think about our model every time we have new fellows. We think about things that they're seeing that we never saw, or just kind of what we're exuding that we didn't know that we were, that we're like, oh God, this wasn't, we didn't want people to think that about us. What are we saying that's making them think that? So it's always really interesting for us. I've been on every fellowship program except for our last one, because now we're growing and to be other places. And so it was sad not being there, because it's one of the most interesting parts is hearing the fellows' feedback about stuff.
I'm just wondering how you feel about the replicability, the scalability of it, and the affordability, because it sounds like your model is costing about $12,000 to $15,000 per village, which is not exactly low cost, and Delta Airlines is taking $6,000 of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ancillary benefits to the students who are maybe coming back with a mini Peace Corps, a life-changing experience and a commitment to go do more.
Yeah.
But in the end, at that price level, it actually is quite expensive to do a village for $12,000 to $15,000. And so where do you go as you look to scale and replicate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you're right, the actual material cost to
Yeah.
start up in a village is very tiny. And the long-term monitoring cost is, paying our staff to go out on motos, which is important and we need it covered. But the flip side, so a lot of what the fellows are fundraising for is their food and their lodging and their travel there. But like I said, the flip side is we're reaching all these donors and all these people in the States that we never would have reached if we didn't have the fellows. And we could either be in one village every 3 months, fundraising $3,000 ourselves per village. My family and friends can only get hit up so many times. Or we can be doing 10 villages in 1 month, and a lot of what the fellows are raising is in for them to come. But it's also, it's like I mentioned before, it's not just like, okay, they fundraised to get here, so let's put them in the village and let them have this African experience to thank them for fundraising. We really do need the people. And like I said before, you can notice a difference now 5 years later in a community that I implemented in alone and a community that had a fellowship team there. There's just this energy around the fellows that are so excited to be there, that aren't doing the same spiel for the 10th time, that month in a new community. It's all new to them. Working with the children is new to them, and the community feels that, and they feed off of that after the fellows leave, and the messages that they send about water and health and all the educational stuff rings so much more true in these really exciting situations than when we do implementations on our own. And it's kind of a moot point because we just wouldn't have the money. We wouldn't be able to be growing to 49 villages if we were not having the fellows raise the funds, and part of it goes to their lodging. And all of their donors know it goes to their lodging, and we're very transparent about that at the beginning. So as we scale, we're always planning to grow through a fellowship program model. And the hardest thing for CWS right now is to fundraise for our expansion, which is something we're actually doing right now. But we're about to open 2 new offices in 2 new regions of Ghana. And the challenge for us is, okay, before we start hosting fellows there and actually getting to new villages, we need to make sure this is the right region for us and set up a water testing lab and hire staff and have a place for young people to come and be safe when they're here. And getting funding for that is much more difficult because no one wants to pay for that. Everyone wants to pay for the little kid to go get clean water. So that's always been a challenge for us, and we hope once we reach a certain point, which based on my calculations, is once we have 3 fellowship programs happening simultaneously in 3 different locations, we start to reach this economies of scale because our staff can monitor in a lot of different places at once, and some of those costs start to go down. That will be completely self-funded through the fellowship program, and we won't have to do any other fundraising campaigns as we want to expand to new regions. And that's always been our goal, is not to have to rely on grants or Indiegogo or whatever.